let alone these devilish tricks.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I only ever had once when I was younger. I was about sort of 13 or 14. One of the older ladies in our village took exception to it, and she was quite vicious about the whole thing, which was rather off-putting of both church and magic. There we are.
Right. Well, I suspect a few trickle in, but we will respect those of you who've arrived on time and kick off. So I see you've all remained muted, and I will now remove the power from you to be able to unmute yourself at any point as we go through. Sam, thank you very much being with us. Father Sam McNally Cross is the priest at St Thomas's in Kensal Town, and he also is a mean player on the fives courts, as well as, of course, sitting on the Serious Youth Violence Scrutiny Committee for the local area. And he's here this evening to speak to us about knife crime. These series of talks are part of our engaging with the Capital Vision 2030, which is the Diocese of London's vision for the next 10 years. And becoming a compassionate community is one of their 3 key points. And under compassionate communities, one of the areas that they're wanting us to look at seriously is youth crime and youth violence, and particularly amongst that knife crime. And it happens that we've got you on exactly the right day, Father Sam, because today we clergy, and I don't know who else get these letters, but some others perhaps, received a message from the Bishop of Stepney about the 2021 Lent appeal, namely challenging youth violence. And I'll try not to steal all of your thunder, Sam, but the point is that she writes saying that youth violence is an issue of great urgency for our time, that 24 children aged just 17 or younger were murdered with a knife or sharp object, and that it will be the focus of the Lent appeal for the Diocese of London this year. So we're delighted to have you with us. You're going to speak to us now. Then we'll be breaking into some smaller groups to offer some of our thoughts and feedback with one another before coming together for a sort of plenary towards the end. If you have questions and thoughts, do store them up on your personal computers for the moment. And then before we go into the breakout rooms that I'll stick you into after Father Sam finishes talking, I'll invite you first to stick anything you want into the general chat so that Sam can be having a look over it while we're in our separate rooms. Sam, over to you.
Thank you very much. If it's possible, if I could share my screen. I've got a little PowerPoint. I think, do you have to give me a, oh, there we go, share screen. Okay. Share that. Just play that. Okay, so now we should have hopefully everything there. So, knife crime and serious youth violence. Now, as this is particularly a emotive topic and something that I know some people have personal connection to, either directly or indirectly, it is something that can produce a whole range of various emotions. So before we begin, perhaps if we may pray. Father God, be with us at this time as we look into this topic of serious youth violence and knife crime. We pray for all our young people who have been affected by these tragedies across this city and across the country, for the families, friends and communities of those whose lives have been lost through serious violence. And we pray for those who perpetrate these acts, that you would turn their hearts. Be with us as we look into this topic and what can be our response as we become more compassionate Christians modelled in the image and pattern of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, so a little bit of an introduction. So these are the things that I'm going to go through this evening. Who am I and why are you listening to me in the first place? A little bit of an overview of knife crime, some of the stats as we try and get to grips with actually how much of an issue this may be. And then the focus on youth violence in particular, asking what can be done, and then we'll have time for discussions and questions at the end. There may well be times during this that I will ask for someone to perhaps provide a thought or a definition on something. So the best thing to do there probably is, I can see a few of you, but I don't have any power to unmute you or anything. So if you can either wave at Jonathan or put up a virtual hand or something, he may well be able to unmute you just for the time being, and then you can venture your thoughts. But as Jonathan said, if you've got any particular questions, then do keep them for the end. If there's something you'd like me to clarify, if I'm rambling about something for a little while and I haven't made much sense for a while, and you want me to rein it in and be a bit more concise, then please do let me know, and I'm very happy to do that. So first of all, apart from the very kind introduction that I was given by Jonathan there, the reason why I've been asked to join you this evening is part of my role as being the parish priest here in Kensal Town. And I won't be offended at all if you don't know where Kensal Town is. Everyone's heard of Kensal Rise and Kensal Green, but Kensal Town sort of disappears into the space in between the two, and that's exactly where it is. If you know where the big Sainsbury's is at the top of Ladbroke Grove, or the big Innocent Smoothies building, or indeed Trellick Tower, that is Kensal Town. So that's where I am, nestled down in the shadow of that great brutalist building. And as part of that, I'm also the ex officio governor of my local school, and then through that, I was co-opted onto the council's scrutiny committee for children and young people. So my role with them is to attend the various meetings, excuse me, at council that are focused particularly on children and young people, to ensure the council are doing the things that we expect them to be doing, to look after and provide for our children and youth in the way that we would expect, to be the link between the council and the community, to be able to provide a little bit of direct intervention into what they're talking about, and also mainly to make sure that they're following due process and that they're actually doing their jobs properly. That's my job for that. And as part of being on that larger scrutiny committee, we are then sort of siphoned off into various areas of interest or expertise. And I've been on the youth violence and knife crime for the last year and a half. There has been a slight change of direction for our scrutiny committee group. The last 3 lockdowns have proved that there's been a huge increase in domestic violence and the way in which domestic violence affects children and young people. And so for the time being, our scrutiny committee is now looking particularly at that and the response to that, and how young people can be supported when there is incidents of domestic violence at home. Unfortunately, that's not to say that knife crime has been solved. It is still just as big a problem as ever. But with our limited resources as a scrutiny committee, we can only respond to the most immediate needs. And it was felt that we should have a look at the domestic violence for the time being in response to COVID, before we return to our serious youth crime. But actually, as we go through this presentation, we'll be able to see that actually some of the links are made between domestic violence and later youth violence anyway. So that's me. That does mean that I'm not an expert in all this, just that I've had the opportunity through the council to attend various either government-run workshops and conferences, and also various charities that run knife crime and youth violence support. And so I've gained and gleaned various pieces of information from them. And if I don't know the answer to a question that you have later on, I will just tell you that I don't know the answer. And if it's something I can find out the answer to, then I will do my best to do so through the channels that I have access to, and I can pass it back through Jonathan to send it back to you as your evenings go on and you start to think about different areas as well. So that's me. And now let's dive straight in to knife crime. It's also just to say that there's one image of a weapon in this presentation, but other than that, there shouldn't be any images at all that are distressing. And although the statistics and the various incidences that will be referenced may be quite difficult. So if you do need to at any point step away from your computer and take a moment, completely fine. Won't be offended in the slightest by you disappearing. Actually, I can't see most of you anyway because of the order of the screen, so it won't make a difference to me. But so do what you need to do in order to keep yourself as you need to be. So here we are. That's the only bladed weapon image that you will see during this presentation. And one of the things we always have to do in scrutiny committees to start with is to define our terms of reference so that we know what we're talking about and that we know that what we're looking into and what the council should be doing as a response. So this is the very obvious question when we begin: what is knife crime? If anyone wants to venture a definition, then please do give us a wave, and you'll be unmuted for the moment. So what is knife crime?
I'm trying my best to try and unmute John. There we go.
John, thank you.
So just at the beginning, let me just explain. I've been chairman, actually, the trustees of a youth club in Battersea where youth crime youth crime was a big issue, knife crime included. And indeed, one night I even had to swab blood off the steps after we had to send somebody off to St George's. So my own view is that knife crime is any dissent which descends into being resolved with a knife, which covers quite a lot.
Indeed. Yeah.
And I think the key element in it is the perception that carrying a knife is important and that using it is also important.
Yeah. Indeed. Thank you. Any other thoughts or immediate responses to that knife crime definition?
Just to let you know, I've now let you all unmute yourselves, trusting that you will do so with appropriate restraint. Yeah, Mike.
Sorry, I was going to say, does there have to be there doesn't have to be an element of any injury in this, presumably. The knife could be used just to threaten or display power rather than necessarily to actually injure, for it to be knife crime.
Absolutely. So when the sort of terms of reference were put in place, when they asked people on the street sort of what they think of when they think of knife crime, the most common phrasing or similar phrasing was street-based knife assaults. That's what we hear on the news most often. That's the things that get reported when it has reached the point where the knife has been used, and that's the resulting either an injury or usually in death. So very often this street-based knife assault is what becomes the most commonly thought of perception about knife crime. But obviously, as we've heard, it's far wider than that, and these other bullet points down here are also included in knife crime. So carrying a knife in a public place without good reason is part of the statistics for knife crime. And the good reason is very, very limited. It's limited to, I'm going to try and remember them off the top of my head now, it's limited to if you use them for work purposes. And the definition also the example they often give is, for example, if you are a chef and you carry your own chef's roll of knives, then you are permitted to carry them in public. If you are taking them to work or from work or to be sharpened or whatever it might be that allows you to do your job properly. If it's part of uniform, either through ceremonial or religious. So if you are a member of the armed forces and part of your uniform, if you are a Gurkha, for example, part of that uniform is to carry a knife. If you are a Sikh, then having a knife in your sock is part of the religious dress of a very sort of formal Sikh tradition, and therefore that is also permitted. There has been lots of discussion about whether traditional Scots dress therefore also allows you to carry a dagger in your sock as well. If you're training somebody in the proficiency of a blade, so if you are something like a chef and you're teaching other chefs how to use knives properly, then you're permitted to be carrying them. If you're an instructor of a particular type of martial arts and you're doing something to instruct people in the use of bladed weapons in martial arts, or indeed in the defense of them, that's also a permitted reason to be carrying knives in public. But there are very few good reasons to be carrying a blade. Two of the most commonly used reasons are for self-defense. That is not classed as a good reason, and for protection, which also is not classed as a good reason. But they're the ones that come up most often when people are stopped carrying knives. Using a knife in a threatening way, as Mike said, it doesn't have to result in injury. Just by having one waving it around, or even having one and not even taking it out of your pocket necessarily, but threatening somebody with it, or somebody using the threat of it is enough to be an offence. And then there's carrying, buying or selling any type of banned knife. Now I had to look up some of the definitions of these because some of them are self-explanatory, others are not. I hadn't heard of a stealth knife before. That was a new. I assumed that was something that was concealed, but actually that's a disguised knife. So that's something that in the old-fashioned Avengers, you can see that he's got his dagger in the end of his umbrella, something like that. And some of those are incredibly terrifying. There are credit cards that look like credit cards in a wallet, and then when you pull it out, actually the bottom half of the credit card is a substantial razor-type blade. There's even a version which is in a sort of £2 coin, where it sort of splits in half, and inside the £2 coin there is a rounded blade, which you wouldn't otherwise know is there. But a stealth knife is actually it's becoming more prominent now that 3D printing is becoming more available. A stealth knife is a blade that's not necessarily made out of metal, and they're becoming increasingly more common because they're not detectable by the metal detectors that often are put up outside stations or outside big events like Notting Hill Carnival, because they don't contain any metal necessarily. They're sometimes made of Kevlar, they're sometimes made of hardened plastic in some ways. They can do huge amounts of damage, but they don't show up on metal scans as some of them often do. Baton knives, again, are ones that sort of extend from other items, particularly walking sticks or the like. And then a zombie knife. These are the ones that sometimes they're sort of made as almost collector's items for sort of fantasy film and TV series. They're serrated on both sides. So not like your serrated bread knife in the kitchen, but if that serration was on both sides, and sometimes they're very pronounced, and they might have hooks and all sorts of things on the design of them. And they really are designed to do as much damage as possible. And yeah, so they're called zombie knives, and very often they are the things that end up in knife bins and the like, because they are a very horrific thing. They don't holster properly. They're designed, to be looked at rather than carried about. So they could do a lot of damage to people, and they have now been banned as to be sold as well, although people still buy them online relatively easily. And then indeed selling any kind of knife to anyone under the age of 18 years old is an offence as well under the Knife Crime Act. So that's a little bit of a broader definition. But when we look at the statistics, these are the 2019-2020 statistics for England and Wales, excluding Greater Manchester Police. For some reason, I think probably to do with the way in which jurisdictions are set up, and the powers that the Mayor of Manchester has, it's recorded in a slightly different way. So for some reason, Greater Manchester Police don't include their stats in the national stats. And these following statistics, these are quite harrowing, as a warning, quite a shock, but important, I think, to show just how much of a problem this is. So this is England and Wales, and this is what is classed as serious crime only. So this doesn't include any of the threats. This doesn't include any of the sales to under 18s or sales of banned kinds of knives. These are only serious crimes and sexual crimes that involve knives. And these are the most up-to-date ones I can find on this, and these are from the government websites. So in 2019 and 2020, there were 442 attempted murders, 2,159 robberies using knives or bladed weapons, 482 rapes, 194 sexual assaults, 20,333 assaults and intent to cause serious harm. That's where damage has actually been done rather than just threatened. And then finally, 256 homicides in 2019-2020, purely with knives or bladed weapons. If your maths is quick, that is a grand total of 46,265 separate incidents of serious knife crime in England and Wales, excluding Manchester. So it will be higher than that if we add in Scotland, which is not included in the statistics, and indeed Manchester as well. just to give you a highlight from, so the same period from the year before, that is an increase of 5.9%. And over the decade of the same period of time, that's an increase of 51.1% of serious crimes and knife violence. So it's not good. It's not a good situation to be in. Before COVID, this was what was considered to be our epidemic, and it is still an epidemic across the country. When during 2019, every murder that was on the news, I printed the name of the victim and put them on the walls of our church underneath the Stations of the Cross. We didn't ever get to 256 because not all of the names were released to the public for various reasons, but we were well over 190 or so, I think, by the time we finished the year. And it was every week as we read out those names, prayed for them, and for the victims themselves, but also for their families, communities, and the perpetrators. And one particular Sunday, we added 7 new names because there had been seven fatal stabbings in one day on that Saturday before. 5 of which were in London, 3 of which were in our borough. So it is something that is unfortunately increasing, and when we see the statistics in sort of raw data like that, it can be quite overwhelming of what we can actually do to be a part of this response to this, and how we can make any effort to reduce this whatsoever. So a little bit of a sidestep now, just to focus on the youth violence, because those statistics obviously is all acts of violence with knives. So this is the most up-to-date youth violence statistics I could find. So as of the end of 2018, there were 4,500 knife and offensive weapons acts committed by young people. And this is where it became quite shocking, between the ages of 10 and 17. Now, these 4,500 incidents are ones that have ended in either convictions or formal reprimands of some sort. So this is not just when the police have turned up and told people to pack it in. This is these people have either been convicted of a crime and tried and charged, or they have been officially given some form of warning or community-based community service or the like. And so the youngest of those was 10 years old. And that accounts for 21%, or of that year, 21% of all knife and weapons crimes in England and Wales, again, excluding Greater Manchester. So this is a problem for our young people, not just teenagers, but our primary school age children. And that was the bit that was really shocking to me, that 10 years old, that's year 5, end of year 5, going into year 6. So these are the young ones in our schools, and age 10. So when the charities have been doing some work with young people, particularly, and the reasons why they carry knives or why they feel the need to use knives, these are some of the things that have been brought up time and time again. So the pressure from peers to be in a gang, and we hear a lot about gang-based violence. And I went to a national conference on county lines and looking at so that for those of you who don't know, county lines is the routes that run drugs from the city into Berkshire and the places outside of London itself. Bizarrely, when I moved into London a few years back, I was walking around the parish here and I saw a vehicle that I recognised, a great big black blacked out window SUV type vehicle, and I recognised the number plate because it was quite distinctive. And I used to see this every Tuesday when I lived in Reading, this truck thing. And as I walked past it, the window rolled down, and the chap inside greeted me, knowing who I was. And I realised it was the drug dealer from the local estate in Reading, where our homeless shelter was. And I used to see him every Tuesday because he used to arrive Tuesday lunchtime, park up outside the estate and sell drugs to the guys who were coming to use the soup kitchen. And I said, "What are you doing down here?" He said, "Oh, well, I live down here." You know, and that was his county line route that he used to follow. And he was quite open about it. Like this was his way of life. This was his business. This was his legitimate income. And he had people that ran for him, and you know, very often he liked to think of himself as one of the good guys because he wouldn't get children to carry drugs for him. A lot of the other gangs would, but so those roots are alive and kicking, and they are part of the issue to do with gangs. And when I was at the national conference, particularly dealing with gangs, what was the most shocking thing that was revealed during that conference is that the time when children are at most risk from gang activity is between the hours of 3:15 and 5:30 when they leave school, before they get home. When I was younger, if my parents were working shifts and that sort of thing, I was a latchkey kid. I went home on the school bus. I walked back to my house in the middle of nowhere in Buckinghamshire. I let myself in with a key that was either hidden somewhere on the doorstep underneath a plant pot, or when I got older, I was allowed my own. I made myself a sandwich and I watched television until my parents came home. Increasingly, that doesn't happen anymore. Partly because parents are worried about being reported to social services if their child is home alone. There's also been an increase in worry about who their children might bring home to the house when they're unsupervised. And so what happens often instead is that mum or dad or whoever has to go out and work various shifts in order to make a living, particularly from areas of high deprivation where there is a high proportion of single parents, and very often they don't have a choice but to work multiple jobs and therefore split shifts and can't always be there where the young person comes home from school. So they're given a few pounds and they're told to go to the local takeaway and to sort of hang around there until they get home. And those who are from the local gangs, they will wait in these places. The primary place being chicken shops. This seems to be the place in which recruiting happens most frequently. They will watch the children that come frequently to these places, and over the course of a week or so, maybe two, one of the children will go up and pay for their meal at the counter, and they'll be told by the person serving that actually it's been paid for them. That man over there has paid for it for you. Now all of a sudden you owe him something, whether you want to or not. But he said that's fine. You know, he just makes friends with you. He just just is nice, is kind. Just says, oh, I don't mind doing it for you. I see you here quite often. What you could do though, you could do me a favor. You could take this envelope to my friend who lives on the estate that you live on. And then without even knowing it, you've become a drug runner. And without even knowing it, you've been affiliated now with a gang. And you won't necessarily know that you're in a gang or that you've been connected to one. And you certainly won't know whether that's the right gang to be part of for where you live. And therefore, just by going home, you could now be straying into territory that's no longer your own. And when gangs want to attack one another and to pick off various members of the other gang, it's not the central figures they get to, it's the ones on the fringes who may or may not necessarily know anything about it in the first place. And so some of our young children can stumble into this way of life purely by accident. And so very often when you hear on the news, so-and-so was not part of any gang, etc. And if you're like me, sometimes the cynical part says, well, they must have been involved in some way. They may not necessarily have known they were involved. They may have been brought in initially in that way, and then afterwards groomed into more sort of gang lifestyle. And some of this is related to living in poverty and in deprived areas. One of the things that has happened, unfortunately, is that youth provision has been cut massively across various boroughs. And now the children in particular have nowhere to go after school. Local youth clubs, locally employed youth leaders and that sort of thing just don't exist anymore. If you look in Kensington and Chelsea as an example, there used to be huge amounts of provision, particularly in the north of the borough. It's all gone. It's now left to charities, to churches, to various other groups. And one of the things that the council has realised they need to do is to invest more heavily in this. Otherwise, this problem will be perpetuated time and time again. So the deprivation of various areas and the lack of opportunity has caused this to be a symptom of, or has caused knife crime as a symptom of a far greater problem underneath. As I mentioned right at the very beginning about domestic violence, violence begats violence. That's a simple equation that we see time and time again. Those who are surrounded by violence when they are younger are going to more likely to perpetuate violence as they get older. And so if young people are growing up in situations of violence, particularly domestic violence, particularly if they see their fathers abusing their mothers, then this will become potentially a problem later on. And because of all of this, then the perceived feelings of power for the young person that comes from carrying a knife or a weapon, it's partly protection. It's also partly a status and an image thing. If you're carrying a bladed weapon, then you have a particular representation to those who are around you, and protection due to the feeling of unsafe in the community. And again, the deprivation of areas, the lack of investment in policing, the lack of investment in community support makes areas feel unsafer for people, and so this becomes a way in which the young person feels they need to protect themselves if no one's going to be looking after them and themselves. And then finally, normalization, because everyone is doing it. So it's partly that peer pressure, but it's partly just normality. It becomes the same as having the latest pair of trainers or the most up-to-date technology. You carry a knife because your mates carry a knife, and if you don't, you're not quite the same as them. And fitting in and belonging is massively important for our young people. That's what they think about. They want to be liked. They want to be involved. They want to be connected to the people who are their friends and their perceived friends. So these are some of the reasons that young people have given, and that has come up through various charity engagement and research into why knife crime is such a big problem in the first place. So what to do? This is a massive area. If we saw from those statistics, how frighteningly high they are, and indeed increasing massively over years and decades. So nothing seems to be working in terms of policing approaches or the way in which things are happening. So I contacted this gentleman here. If you watch any sort of true crime documentaries online or on television, you may well have seen this chap. This is Professor David Wilson, also coincidentally used to be my dad's old boss back when Dad was a prison officer in Grendon, and Professor David Wilson was the governor. He's a criminologist and has spent a huge amount of time working with prisoners in holistic ways in order to try and understand violence. And when I emailed him and spoke to him about knife crime, this is what he says. He said, the only advice that I can give is that you read everything about the Glasgow violence reduction strategy. I fear there has been a reluctance to accept what they did in that city and apply it to London. Even so, as recently as 2009, Glasgow was the murder capital of Europe. But through the Glasgow violence reduction strategy, this is a thing of the past, with the murder rate having fallen by 60%. Their work holds the key. And the Glasgow violence reduction strategy is a huge document, which I won't go through everything in it with you now, because that would take us until next Wednesday. But it's a public health model to do with violence. Essentially, the motto for Glasgow violence health reduction is that violence is a disease, and therefore it can be treated like a disease. And so the way in which they do so is it can't just be one particular aspect or element that's focused upon. So it has 4 strands. Firstly, there is the recognition that gangs are heavily involved in this, and the need to target gangs specifically. So the police's powers around gangs have been particularly heightened, and sometimes those are controversial. We've seen some methods applied in places like this, stop and search, etc. And obviously, if they're used in the wrong way, and the way in which it can come across and can demonstrably be institutionally racist, that's an issue. But when applied properly and with the correct guidance and scrutiny, focusing on particular gangs and particular gang activity does help in the reduction of it. But in order to prevent gangs from growing and from continuing to hold power in particular cities, they need to be tackled at the root, a bit like a weed growing. There's no point in taking off the surface level, locking up the people who are active in gang life, because the root will grow underneath and will come back and sprout again and again and again. And the people who are the root of these gangs will protect themselves very happily by putting other people in the firing line instead. So the police will never really get to the people who are involved. And so the only way you can really deal with the gangs is to strangle the influx of young people that they can gather into their gang to prevent it from growing. And to do that, you need to provide alternatives for young people. So there has to be a focus on particularly young men and what we provide for young men in order to feel that they don't need the validation and the camaraderie of a gang to affect that deep-seated need within the self to be accepted and to be wanted. And they've been doing lots of work in the alternatives. Again, it's the investment in youth provision. They've done a lot of things to do with boxing, with sports, with various ways in which men can be with other men, younger men being with older men, ways in which that can be addressed so that good role models are placed in there. If fathers are absent, providing almost father substitutes in the community, men in the community taking fatherhood seriously and being fathers to the young men in their community, whether they are blood related or not. And so providing alternatives for that. So there has to be investment in youth provision, whether that's sport, whether that's clubs, whether that's different activities that are going to fire the imagination of young people and get them involved. The other problem with gangs is that it can become quickly very lucrative. That you can be a teenager with a bicycle and be earning huge amounts of money every week running drugs around the city. And so an alternative has to be given in terms of opportunity, that they can have a different way of life that is not going to be as dangerous. And apprenticeships, crafts and trades that are not as have not become part of the vocational training models that have gone forwards need to be recaptured and invested in, so that young people do have alternatives as ways of finding employment that is not necessarily based on traditional academics, which favours a particular class and demographic, but is able to address the skills and the abilities that young people have. Wherefore, they don't have to seek employment in nefarious ways, and that needs to be some imagination in that as well. There needs to be perhaps people who are going to help them with music production or YouTube video production. The ways in which the areas in which young people want to in this day and age earn their living and craft themselves, whether it's through sport, whether it's through media, whether it's through various different means, not just the traditional crafts and skills such as plumbing and carpentry and bricklaying that we've always had and still need and have a shortage of. And then finally, education, that our schools play an enormous role in the reduction of violence. Apart from being at home with their whoever's looking after them, their teachers are probably the adults that have the most contact with our young people. And therefore, they are the first port of call in terms of providing a structure and input into this. What Glasgow did as part of their violence reduction is they had senior clinicians from health, from the NHS and the like, going into schools and showing quite graphically, in sort of almost like a shock tactic method, the outcome of knife crime. So to see it live, because until you have swept up blood from the doorstep of your youth club, or you've seen it in the stairwell of your block of flats, it's going to still remain something quite abstract, even if your community is affected by it. And so actually sometimes hammering that point home in a very shocking and visual way is a wake-up call. And so through education and through the school's contact, and within partnership with the health service. That's what they began to do. And we're lucky in London, we have various charities and groups that focus on exactly this. If you've come across the Ben Kinsella Trust, they do a huge amount of work to do with knife crime and the education of young people in not carrying knives. And they have an immersive experience. You can go to the Ben Kinsella Trust house, and they have this big sort of museum, which is sort of all the stats and things that we've shared this evening and more. And then they have an immersive experience with an actor in a prison cell that's mocked up in the back of this place. And we had a demonstration of this at one of the things I went to, and even in the very bright auditorium lecture theatre that we were in, where the cell couldn't be replicated in the same way, the intensity of the performance by this chap was incredibly powerful. And so our young people being exposed to the very real dangers of this, coupling it with all of these things alone, standalone things don't do anything particularly helpful. As we've seen, there's lots of groups that are doing good things here and there, but there's a lack of joined up thinking between these. And as Professor David Wilson said, for some reason there has been a reticence to bring in a similar violence reduction strategy in London. We don't really know why. It may be a financial thing. It may just be it may just, I don't know. I don't know the reasons why, but it's people have tried to push it before, and it's not occurred. But it works, and there's evidence showing this works, and the public health approach to it, treating violence like a disease that can be solved, is important, and is the way in which differences can be made to the lives of young people. So that's so what to do. So I think really that is the presentation. That's what I've got for you this evening, and that the question is thrown open to you of what do we do. And I'm not certainly suggesting that the church need to go and vigilante form groups to patrol our streets and keep our young people safe, but we do have access to our communities in ways that are otherwise not necessarily apparent to other groups. People talk to the church in ways they won't share things with the police or social services. We do very often have volunteers and those who are willing to roll their sleeves up and do something. And therefore there are areas in which we can be vocal and also practical in our support for this. And as Jonathan mentioned, this year's Lent appeal, although is primarily a financial thing, there are many things that we can do to respond to this. And that's really the question that I'd like to leave you with. What do we do as the church to help our young people to not become blighted by this ongoing epidemic? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Indeed, you're getting silent rounds of applause from the room. So what we're going to do now is, if you've got some questions that you'd like Sam to respond to, and some I see are already popping up, then stick them into the chat now, and he'll be having a think about them. What I'm going to do is put the rest of us into 3 rooms with about 5 people in each, and in those smaller breakout rooms, I will entrust you to share your own feedback from the words that Sam has spoken to us, things that struck you particularly, or experiences and knowledge of your own that you want to share with one another. With the overriding question to be thinking about as we prepare our own mission action plan, and as we seek to be part of this Dyson vision of engaging and reducing youth crime and knife crime particularly, what resources, what abilities, what skills we have in the church, both in terms of the people who are part of our church at the moment and the links that we have, and how we can, as a local community, be doing something. So questions you want Sam to answer in the chat now, and then I'll stick you into breakout rooms so you can talk to one another and share your thoughts. John, just while I do this, you can you've got your hand up. As long as it's a short one, you can ask as I put us into room.
Cold face experience. I could just enhance what Father Sam has said, because it might feed into what we're going to be talking about. We had exactly this problem in Devas. And as I say, at one stage, it was really quite bad. For various reasons, we become dominated by sort of disconnected black blokes who were coming up from Brixton, and we had to move it. And the three things which we do, which I think made a real impact, one of which is that we had a juniors group. You talk about the incidence of knife crime at the 10 to 17 age group.
John,
critical. People are moving from the safety of the primary school into the secondary school. And if they have the right mindset when they leave the primary school, they won't pick up on the secondary school habits.
John,
that's the first.
John, could I jump in just quickly? Could you bear sharing this with your little group so we can split people out into the smaller groups first, and then?
Okay, I just thought it might be sort of general sort of.
I just know that our time is pressing on, and I'm sure it will be of general interest to all of us. And maybe when we come back together at the plenary at the end, refined and honed by the comments of the other members of your room, you'll be able to give us a perfect and perhaps even richer synopsis of what you're saying now. So I'll stick us all into rooms now, and we'll come back together in 5 or 10 minutes. I'll see how we're doing. Hello, Father Debo. Oh, great, he's gone to his room. Hello, Sam.
Oh.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. I thought I'd keep you out of the room so that you don't just get barraged with questions at the moment.
Indeed. How's all? Are you settled nicely over there?
Yes, doing very well. Thank you indeed.
And how's the little one? Probably.
Apparently, when you hit close, it gives him another 60 seconds.
There we are. That'll do it.
Welcome back, Penny. Welcome back, everybody. Sam's going to just run through the answers to the questions that have popped up in the chat. Then I'll go back to Brother John to hear his thoughts, and then open to the room for any of you who would like to share things that have come up from Sam's talk or things that you've shared in your rooms. Sam, the questions in chat.
Lovely, thank you very much. So first question we had in chat was, I mentioned the Ben Kinsella Trust. What other local charities are there? So there are some big national charities, but the ones in London that are, or London specific, sometimes work in particular boroughs, but sometimes are across the whole of the borough. And the ones that sort of come to mind immediately is Words for Weapons, which is a Christian-based charity, and you may well have spotted one of the things they do is the placing of knife bins, or very often in churchyards or church premises around London, and they're quite a good charity for that specific purpose, and they also do a lot of education. Lives Not Knives is a youth-led charity to prevent knife crime and serious youth violence, and also looking at school exclusions as well, which is a part of the whole problem. Knife Free, which is part of the Lives Not Knives charity. The Wickers charity is a Hackney-based specific charity. They do a lot of knife crime awareness workshops. And then the Drop the Knife Foundation is similar to Words for Weapons in terms of providing places to amnesty various blades. I think 2018, the Mayor of London supported 43 local charities with funding, and the list of all of them are available on the Mayor of London's website as well. If you have a quick Google of London knife crime charities, you'll find a whole host of them. Yes, there are quite a few doing similar work, lots of overlap, and again, that's one of the things that when something becomes the focal point, particularly of local government, and suddenly various bits of funding open up, you find that various different charities start doing the same things in the same areas, and perhaps some more joined up thinking needs to occur. So there are just a few charities there that are tackling this particular thing. Catherine McDowell, to what extent is the decline in uniformed youth and informal youth clubs a factor, and has the church considered whether this could be revived? I think that is a key factor to this, and I think uniformed groups in particular are very helpful in terms of, I grew up in the Scouts. That was if you were where I grew up in Buckinghamshire, if you were a young person, you were involved in the Scouts. If you were in one of the bigger cities nearby, you were probably part of the Boys Brigade. They seem to have the domination of the towns, but the Scouts were quite heavily there as well. And then a lot of my friends did cadets as well. The major problem with uniform groups is the lack of adult leaders. It's been a problem since I was a youth and a member of it myself. At one point, I was the youngest arcaler in the country, and I was 16 and a half because they couldn't find any adults to do the major work, and I had more free time than most adults did after doing school homework and that sort of thing. So that's one thing that definitely I think the church could be assisting with, is the providing of people who are used to volunteering, who understand the very peculiar nature of working with odd organisations, because they are all a little bit strange, the uniform groups, in a very charming way, and I think actually being part of that and offering your time and indeed your own expertise and life experience to young people through uniformed groups particularly is a great thing. I'm a massively keen advocate for that, and if you are part of the church and want to be involved, particularly in scouting, then Father Lee Clark, who is the parish priest of St Philip's in Tottenham, I think he is the current area commissioner for scouting. So by all means, do get in touch if it's something that you have the time and capacity to do. And if you're, in the church, I was also very pleased to see actually the Scout movement in London is a far cry away from where I grew up in the villages, where it was all done on a shoestring and everything was put together in the back of someone's garage. They have a hugely supportive development network in London. So if you're thinking of, if you're in an area where it is necessary, so essentially I before lockdown stopped us from doing anything, I was going to volunteer to rejoin the Scouts as a leader and be part of it. And when the local area chap came out to see me, he had this big spreadsheet on his computer where he could work out where the nearest groups were, and we realized there was a complete lack of groups in my area. And so rather than just volunteering to join as a leader, he said, well, if you've got the venue and you've got the space, then we can put in a development officer to begin a unit and then recruit local people using the church contacts, using the school contacts, to then become the leaders in the future. And they've got funding and things available to provide sort of 6 months lead-in time so that you can firmly establish a group very easily without too much effort on the part of one person in particular, because it becomes someone's job at Scout HQ. So there are resources out there to help us promote these groups to young people, and I think they'll make a massive difference. And it's a very good thing that the churches can be involved with. So yeah, you've got me on one of my hobby horses there, but yes, very, very pro uniform groups.
Yeah. Catherine, I mean, I just remind you that we do have all those uniform groups working out of the hall, but possibly what we could do is to talk to them a little bit more about how that might be opened out. Yeah. But they've been there for a long time, well established, although not since lockdown.
Yeah, indeed.
What is lacking though, Penny, to be fair, is Scouts.
Older boys, yeah.
It's the older boys, and that I think is the big hole.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the things that go along with the uniform groups, with the discipline, with the skills that are learned, with the good community that it builds. You make friends for life through Scouts, and there are people that I was friends with that was solidified through uniform groups that are still my friends now, and that's been a massively important part of my life, and has shaped partly who I am, and I think that's a good.
Sam, just before you go on to the third question, I'll let John jump in.
Yes, please do.
John.
No, one of the points about uniform groups is their self-funding, and the problem with state provision for young people. Broadly speaking, councils have a responsibility to minimise the impact of young people causing harm, and if they can do that in a minimalist manner, well, the tendency is to gravitate that way. It's very different, I think, from uniform groups or self-funding. So they're much more likely to be successful. I think that's the point about uniform groups. And they're self-funding. They're not subject to the sort of vagaries of political oscillation.
Absolutely, yeah. That's.
John, do you want to share with us your other thoughts from a little bit earlier, and then we'll go around.
Okay, well, let me just summarize them very quickly. The Demas Youth Club is based upon a Victorian philanthropy, and it's linked with University College Oxford. So we had this peculiar status that if you came to Demas, somehow it was access to the whole sort of profile of being part of the successful part of society, and that was hugely important. We addressed the question of youth crime in three manners, one of which was we realized when a child goes between the primary school and secondary school, they're moving from a very supportive parental environment to an environment where the mores of the big bullish 16-year-old blokes may dominate. It was hugely important that and this is what the point of the juniors was, that they had the mindset and the confidence to resist it when they got there. So we were sort of inoculating them against the culture. The second of which was, we realized that carrying knives were in large part due to people thinking that they had to carry it as the motive of defense. So we introduced kickboxing. The point about kickboxing is that the distance between your foot and where the other bloke is longer than somebody with a knife. So it created quite a strong instinct about that if you can kickbox, you don't necessarily have to carry a knife. You're in with a reasonable chance. The third point was that we arranged, and we realized that a key element in this is the women, the young women, because most of this is about bullish blokes. If we get the young women to take their role, it'll be important. And one of the things we did was to there was the medical group based upon a trauma unit in Liverpool, which used to come and explain how to do IA, instant action first aid. The point about this is that the response for an ambulance in Wandsworth, which is pretty good, is about 7 or 8 minutes. 5 litres of blood, which is what you typically has, can disappear by the time an ambulance arrives. So it's very important that if any young person is going home as a group, or they're attacked or in the stairwell, that when somebody is attacked, they know immediately how to stop the blood being lost. And that, broadly speaking, means taking either off your jumper, or you take your jumper off and stuff it in the hole, you take off your tights and wrap it round, you've got a tourniquet. And if you inculcate that into every young person, that's the IA, suddenly actually the sheer drama of it has a really important effect, because they realize this is actually being very, very serious. And they're disencouraged, it begins to permeate back to the families. Don't do it, even in a small manner. And just the third point I'd like to make, Ian's comment about music as an outreach. I think music is a wonderful way of outreaching to young people, because they respond too much to it. And interestingly, choral singing and other things is almost the best way, because you get lots of people together onto it. I think it's a very, I think it's an excellent idea. I'm aware that we haven't got a lot of time.
Mike, I saw your hand up, but just in case there's anybody who's not had a chance to ask a question yet, or wanted to share a comment, to jump in. Mike, the floor is yours.
I was going back to the question of uniform youth organisations. I'm slightly involved in their training corps organisation, but that's up in the Hammersmith area. But there is an Army Cadet Force organisation in Fulham House, which I don't think we've made any links with. Whether there's any merit in checking them out, I don't know.
Yes, there is, run by Hugh.
Yeah. Purcell, you're thinking of?
Yeah, I know, exactly. Just by Putney Bridge Station.
Yes, that's right.
Run by Hugh, who was in the Irish Guards.
Yeah, Hugh's retired from there now.
Yeah, he runs it. Yeah, yeah, that's a good point.
Sorry, just the last question that was in the chat was what from Mike was on a minor scale. How does a schoolboy buy a penknife now? Well, not in the shops, because it's, as we saw earlier, it's a criminal offence now to sell any form of knife to anyone under the age of 18 years old. Amazon is the answer.
It's a light-hearted thing, but it's no. How do you teach a child to respect a knife? How do you use a knife?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. That actually a lot of these really horrific, either stealth knives or disguised blades are coming through the internet. If you've got someone's credit card, you don't need to prove your age. So a 16-year-old with her own bank card can quite happily purchase something on Amazon, which should be restricted to people who are over the age of 18. And because we have the option now not to be delivered to the door, you can have it sent to an Amazon box, or you can have it sent to almost like a PO box kind of pickup, click and collect type point. That can be done entirely. You get there, it's put in a box, you go and unlock it yourself with the code that comes on your phone. Nobody's checked who you are. Nobody has checked your age. And so you can buy age-restricted products quite easily that way. I mean, some of the online places are doing a bit more due diligence in that now, because they have realised that this is an issue. But that's the way that people will get them. And again, when I was younger, we all used to carry penknives. That was part of growing up in the village. We used them to make dens and sticks and this, that, and the other. But I took mine to Scouts, and I was taught at Scouts how to use it and how not to use it, and that was part of it. But
that's my uncle's knife. It's a little penknife inside a 4-franc piece or 2-franc piece.
Yeah.
But we complain at how the Americans' gun law is so lax and how people can buy a gun. But why are guns like knives like zombie knives and the thing that you showed, why are they allowed to be sold? There's no reason for those things to be in anybody's possession, really, is there?
Indeed. I mean, it was only I think it was 2017 that one of the angling magazines were doing a free gift of effectively a lock knife.
Yes.
And it was a $2.99 special offer, and you got a whacking great big blade with it. And I think it was pulled eventually because someone went, no, this is not a good idea. There's no prohibition on buying angling magazines if you're 15 years old. But even if it's got a whacking great big knife attached to the front cover. So thankfully that didn't happen, but it was planned, and I think some of them had gone out before someone went, no, you just can't do this. But
we've got time for two more. I've seen the McDowells and the Merricks with their hands up. We'll take them. Oh, and Jess as well. Okay, go on. Three as long as you answer quite quickly, Sam. Or
okay, do your best.
Let's head to the McDowell household first.
Yes. John kindly mentioned that in our little breakout group, we just touched on the area of music. Now, the arts culture is kind of soft power, and we're talking about something very, very hard, of course. But I just wondered whether, Father Sam, you got any kind of evidence of how cultural activities, community-based activities, creative work in the arts, particularly I think in music, have actually perhaps made an impact. And I speak from a particular perspective. I got a very great surprise a year ago after about 9 years of working with a particular very mixed, quite deprived community in Portugal, a city of 150,000 people. 15,000 of these young people got involved in the festival in one way or another. And then the mayor got up at some event and said that something in the region, something like 80% drop in young people's crime and the occupancy of young offenders' institutions had dropped dramatically, and also a lot of the different gangs had kind of dispersed through being creatively involved in music. Now, there's a lot of hearsay around that, and I haven't got hard figures, but I wondered whether you have got sort of a sense in which this soft power of the arts and of music in particular is something which as a church we can actually do as we reach as our musical sort of talent from within reaches further out in the community. Perhaps there is something in that as to finding some solutions.
Yeah, I think again, I don't have any of the figures to hand, but I think anything that creates an alternative community, anything that instills a commitment and a discipline. Anything that has an outcome where so there's been various programs. I think Gareth Malone has done a choir in using sort of deprived schools and things as ways to help with children's attainment and things like that. There was a really good program. Was it, I think last year, or this year's just blended into nothingness, so maybe the year before even, where it was something like from hip hop to opera or something. And I think they took a group of inner city youth from Croydon, I think it was, and places like that, and took them to the national to the Royal Opera House, and for I think they were all BAME sort of ethnic minority people, and the person who came and sang for them was also BAME, but it was a classically trained opera singer. And there was just this moment where he was performing for them in the just in the foyer of this place, and they were just shocked that actually someone who looked like them could sing music like that. And so actually this sort of cross-cultural stuff is very helpful to kind of open eyes and open opportunity. It's part of that holistic approach of the changing of opportunity, of adding opportunities actually, and incentivizing things that way. So,
George, a couple of minutes.
I was just wondering, it might be too early to tell or have any information, or it might be too short a time to make any difference. But I wondered whether the lockdown had any implications on the grassroots recruiting process that you talked about, with the chicken shops not being able to let people linger inside and parents maybe more likely to be at home, and so not having a 2-hour window between school ending and being able to be at home for their kids. Whether that made any...
the statistics haven't come out for that yet, but I would not be surprised remotely if next year we see a dip in youth violence, and indeed actually in all crime, because people are home more often. You're not going to rob as many houses when people are working from home, that sort of thing. So I think we will see a general dip in statistics next year, but I think it will be a one-off, and I think it will pick straight back up again, unless we do something to kind of.
The counter to that would be, I think we've seen more evidence of sort of hanging around in the churchyard in the last year.
Yeah.
And those of us who've been cleaning it up, it's a constant task, and it's drugs.
And on that note, that's exactly how and why my 18-year-old son was mugged in the park, because during lockdown, because they had nowhere to go.
Yeah.
They were told they can't be in anyone else's houses. They can't be in any, cafe, restaurant, youth club, anything else. So they go and hang out in the park. And because they don't want to be just two of them, they want to be 5 of them, they hang out in the darkest part of the park where no one can see them. And that's when they get mugged.
Yep.
So when we reported it to the police and had the conversation that the Met Police weren't communicating with the Parks Police, and there was absolutely no coordination between the two. So the Parks Police were none the wiser about what had happened. I said to them, it is blindingly obvious to me that you don't need to be patrolling the streets on the high street, which is empty at 10 o'clock in the morning. You need to be patrolling the parks after dark in the winter where these kids are going, because they've got nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
And it seemed like that was
And-
rocket science to the police.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, the reason the churchyard is not locked up is because the police have stopped locking it. And we haven't got the means of doing it every night and clearing. And more importantly, in order to lock it, you've got to clear it. You know, wander around, get people out. So that, you know, there are things we can do about lobbying the police to tell them that it's a problem. You know, it can have an impact. Sorry.
Very much. Well, thank you very much, Sam, for coming and sharing all of that information and your personal experience with us this evening. We're hoping that this will form a part of the mission action plan that we're putting together at the moment. The people who are involved in that are all of the members of the PCC. So if you're a member of the PCC, then great, you're on board already. If you're not, but you've got some great ideas or something that you want to feedback from this session, then find your favourite member of the PCC or those with the largest ears and tell them what you'd like us to be thinking about as we put that mission action plan together. Next week, on the 27th of January, we have Nigel Davidson coming to talk to us about debt, another one of the key issues that the diocesan vision considers. Nigel's a Christians Against Poverty key relationship manager and a member of the national speaker team. And there's a local Christians Against Poverty debt relief centre. Unfortunately, the guy who runs the local one wasn't able to speak to us, but Nigel is going to talk a little bit about their local work as well. So we can hear both about the kind of national issues and also those that are specific to us here. And do invite your friends, family, and those who normally sit on the pew next to you on a Sunday morning to come along next week as well. Sam, thank you very much. We wish you many blessings in your ministry up at St Thomas's in Kensal Town, and we give thanks for the work that you're already doing, and we look forward to being partners in this work of the gospel with you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for having me.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. Well done,
Thanks.
Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. And thank
Everyone.
you, Jonathan, for hearing us so well. Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
Agreed.